We're going to be covering today how to address some common business challenges using smart data thinking with a focus on the asset management sector. So just before we dive into the detail of the session, just a quick background on Xceed. So Xceed is a company formed in 2003. We're a fast-growing IT professional services firm. Our headquarters are in London. We've also got offices in Edinburgh and New York. Our industry focus is predominantly within financial services. However, we do work across other sectors such as telecoms, media and energy. And really our skills are kind of built up on sort of pure technology consulting around IT infrastructure, application integration and business change. Really underpinning our services a strong capability within project and program management. And really, over the last 10 years of operating, we've worked for major clients within the FTSE 100, Fortune 500. So really, we're seeing a lot of growth around data specifically at the moment. So just a bit of housekeeping before we move on. So the session today is going to be recorded. So we'll send out a link to it following the webinar. There will also be an opportunity at the end to ask any questions. If you do have any, please do post them in the chat window and we will answer them at the end of the webinar. If you do have any technical problems, then there is an email address which should be coming up on the screen shortly, which you can send any issues to, and we'll look to resolve those. So just before we move on, we'll just do a couple of introductions. So myself, Graham McDaniel, I'm a senior managing consultant within Xceed. Have over 12 years experience within enterprise and data architecture within the financial services sector. My experience has been built up through my time at Xceed, but also previously within Deloitte Consulting. And I shall just pass you over to Paul, who will give a brief introduction as well.
Yeah, thanks, Graham. So I'm Paul Coffey. I'm the kind of lead enterprise data architecture consultant at Xceed, and Graham and I have been working over the last couple of months to develop some propositions, and we're going to talk about some of them today. Good afternoon.
Okay, perfect. So now we're going to kick off with the presentation. I'm going to hand back to Paul, who's going to cover the first section.
Okay, thanks, Graham. So we've got a little list of things that we're going to talk about today. So often the case when we're talking about the data, as we both know, Graham, is that there always has to be, what is the driver? What is it that's pushing us towards this? In particular, at the moment, we have the BCBS 239 risk data aggregation principles, and we have the impending arrival of the MiFID II directive. But I think what we've found when we look at this quite closely is that we ask the question for ourselves, is this just common sense? If we do the data thing better, does that make the organisation work a bit clearer? And I think that we're going to try and explore that a little bit by not taking the view that this is very much regulatory driven or risk driven, but it's actually commercially driven as well. It's a way of operating your business in a much more efficient fashion. We also want to have a quick expose, I think, of what we would call big data, because big data is very much a kind of sexy term in the industry at the moment, and it's one that doesn't particularly explain itself well, and we've got some slight variations on there that we will be talking about in a few minutes. And then once we have an understanding of the big data elements, the big data concepts that we're thinking about, we're going to start looking at what would be some smart solutions for you to be able to better manage the data you have and to better manage the organizations that you're within. We'll also be taking a look at the flow of data through an asset management organization to show you, a happy picture of what happens. But we'll then be comparing it with the reality of what would be a data landscape, and then we'll be covering some of the key points afterwards. So if we're going to move on, the first bit I would like to chuck in here is one of my favourite quotes, and it comes from Albert Einstein, and it says, "We cannot solve our problems with the same thinking we used when we created them." And what we mean by that is that the complexity of the systems and data landscapes within organisations at the moment comes from a particular way of thinking, a particular way of operating. It's very much when you're seeing a lot of this, very program-driven, very project-driven, perhaps not particularly strategically driven. And what happens is you get multiple capabilities on a landscape that operates probably not alongside each other particularly well. The data doesn't move particularly well. It's not consistently defined. And that has caused problems in the industry, as we know from the crash in 2008. And what the regulator really is telling you to do now is just to be a little bit clear about what it is that you're doing.
And I mean, the data's not really ever had that sort of board level...
The spotlight,
spotlight from the board level. So what we've ended up with really is silos of good practice across organisations, but no organisation from what we've seen is really doing that consistently across all business units, all divisions, etc.
Yeah, that's true. And speaking to some of the clients we have at the moment, particularly the large global banks, they're very busy in trying to implement the compliance with the regulations. But as they uncover more and more of the complexities of the landscape they've got, I think they're probably thinking to themselves how they managed to survive in the past. Okay, so if we're going to talk about data, then I think we need to put a little bit of context around it. So what we want to explore here is the concept of small data, the concept of big data, and the concept of smart data. But before we get to that, there's a couple of things that we'd like to use here. So what you've got there in front of you is a very high-level conceptual data model for asset management. And one of the things that we find that we need to make clear very early on is that there are a set of entities on that model which cover the breadth of data that an organisation uses. And there's one at the bottom which covers the depth of the data that an organisation uses. And it's very important to understand the difference between the breadth and the depth, particularly when we start talking about big and small. So small data, using this model, would be the data that you currently use. You know, how your organisation is running at the moment. Okay. What big data does is it adds additional breadth to the data that you're using, whether that be internally or externally. And once you have added that breadth and gone big, you can then add additional depth in the kind of transaction analysis that you can do. Now, the way that we kind of like to think about it here is that there's no real point in just going big for the sake of it. The idea is we want to be pretty smart about what it is that you're trying to do. So it's understanding the types of data that you can bring in to broaden your analysis. So if you look here on the party side, there's many organisations will manage party data internally, but there is a significant amount of external reference sources that you can use, which you can link to, and it can increase the quality of the data. But it also helps when you start doing things like AML, FATCA, KYC, KYB, and the whole client onboarding space. Now, one of the things we need to understand is when we talk about the data model is to understand also internally what is your data landscape. And what our experience has found is that the data landscape is made up of two quite distinct parts, which have some very, I suppose you could call very jagged connections between them. So one of them is the IT systems landscape. That's the platforms that have been developed or procured and implemented and looked after by your technology department. But the other one is the EUC landscape. That's the one which is sets of spreadsheets or databases which are built by users for very legitimate business reasons, as we've seen, but which are unknown to the IT department and which are very, very important to the running of the organisation. But in a sense, they're kind of hidden, and I kind of liken this a little bit to the Wild West, you know, because it's an ungoverned situation. What we find whenever we do this with an organisation is that the total data landscape, the IT systems and the EUC, it's much, much bigger than we ever think it is, isn't that right?
That's right. I mean, what we've seen, particularly within asset management firms, is a really complex landscape of EUCs with really, quite large data sets contained within them and lots of linkages between various EUCs across the organisation. And that really becomes an issue when you want to try and work out what the lineage is, or being able to trace where a particular regulatory report has been created from, if you're unable to really understand what that EUC landscape is in detail.
It is, and of course, when it's not so much now that the regulator is asking you to provide robust figures for regulatory control, for instance, in the RWA allocation, but also to be able to prove how you came up with that number. And if you can't provide an audited lineage of the data that you use to do it, then the figures that are generated are themselves, they can be spurious. So some of the common features that we mentioned there. So data exists and it moves between the IT platforms and the business-owned EUCs. It's not a standard flow. There are calculations that are made in EUCs which are then pumped into IT platforms. The landscape that you have is much bigger than you realise. It's a very opaque one. It's difficult to get any detail. The only way that you can actually identify what these are is to be very proactive with the business community, and it's all areas of the business. It can be the front office, the middle office, the back office, the finance, the risk. All the areas need to be involved. You've got to recognise that while you might have an IT governance mechanism, the EUCs are generated as and when they are required, and there is no governance in there. So being able to sort of get a handle on the complexity of the landscape gives you the opportunity, obviously, to govern it. Okay, so some of the benefits here. With these kind of solid foundations and the ability to do robust management and governance, you have then got you've also got the ability to actually work out what you can do with smart data, as in what breadth of data can you add to what you're doing at the moment, which will give you a better end result. If you've got a good view of the landscape and you have the ability to manage it, you will see an increase in the confidence from the regulator, because it's one of the questions that they will be asking. They'll be very, very specific about the lineage piece. And just actually having the full knowledge of that landscape gives you the ability to do better program interlock through your PMO function when you're doing change programs. It's very, very good to be able to know that if you've got 2 or 3 programs that are operating within the same area, is that they're not actually one is not going to undo something another program is going to do. So that ability to do management control is much better. So what we want to do now is to show you what would be what we would call a happy slide, isn't it, Graham?
Indeed, yes.
This one looks nice, and this is just following a very, very simple left to right flow of data through an asset management organisation. So on the left-hand side, we have the products and services that the organisations would be looking to build and to use. Then there's the investment manufacturing area. We move also into the finance, the risk and the compliance area. And as is normally the case that we find, is that the data consolidation and the MI and the data warehousing, the analytics tends to be done just quite late in the life cycle, and is normally problematic given if we think back to our model there, we were talking about party data and product data and arrangement data. If it's not clearly defined and it's not consistent, there's always problems when you're trying to merge it together in the warehouse. And then also you have the point at which you are providing information externally, and that can be for any number of regulatory reasons, or market reasons, or if you're using an outsourced partner, and you're sending data to them, and you're obviously looking for data in return. Now, this is it's quite a happy picture, but let's take you through what is a picture of something that we were working on some time ago, recently, which is a real landscape. I'm just going to give you a quick reminder there of the data model. So the picture that we have here is of a real systems landscape that was developed through a risk transformation exercise recently. The reason why this was built was that in trying to explain to a number of the different users and customers that we had within the organization about what it was that we were trying to do from a data architecture point of view, We found that there was people sometimes don't naturally think about data. They tend to think more about systems. Isn't that right, Graham?
That's right, yeah. I mean, it's often driven from an IT perspective, which isn't really the right approach to this because it's an IT and business problem.
It is, yeah, and people understand the language of system or what it is a system designed to do rather than the data that's actually held within it. So when we drew up this picture, it was to try and give people an idea of the landscape of the scope of the work that we were trying to do. And strange enough, as the picture was drawn and we displayed it, there was a couple of interesting reactions to this. On the one hand, people were very happy that the landscape had been documented because it gave them the ability to understand what change and change control they needed to have. And for other people, there was a kind of blank refusal to believe that that's what was actually out there. Now, the interesting thing about this picture here is that we started intending to do it on an A3 as an illustrative example. What we ended up with was a double A0 Visio. Really because we didn't realize there was so much out there, and the organization that we're working with, they didn't realize there was so much out there. And actually this one has had some detail taken out because of the number of EUCs that we found. I think we'd had to go to 4 times A0, looking up, building some nice wallpaper, I think, actually. Okay, so that's the comparison there of the what is really happening in an organization as opposed to that kind of happy picture that we had previously, which is what people might like to think is actually happening.
I mean, just to add there, I mean, it's actually quite a time-consuming process to get to this point where you understand that landscape, and is why really Xceed have put together a proposition around data landscape simplification. And what we have here is a tool set really with some good partners out in the industry that have some great software which can essentially be installed on the network, and that can automatically discover what that EUC landscape is, and will tell you what the connections are between various EUCs, and it will draw that picture for you. Likewise, we have some software that can enable you to go out to all of the business areas and enable the business to give you that information on what data repositories exist, and give you that view of the systems data landscape. And this is a much better approach than just going out manually with a spreadsheet and trying to document all of this, because it really is quite a difficult process.
It is. It's something that's I think often not realised at the beginning of a particular piece of work, but it rapidly becomes quite overwhelming as you continue in the work. Particularly when you have, for instance, a couple of business analysts who are trying to kind of map out a set of processes, and you find that it's not actually 2 platforms you're talking about. There's another 15 involved, and then we're also talking about there's a significant number of EUCs which are used to aggregate and correlate data, which is then generated into sort of information which is then used to generate the big high-end figures that the regulator, not only the regulator needs to know, but also the board need to know on how you're going to run your organization. Now, we want to concentrate just a little bit now on thinking about some of the typical challenges that we have in a large, complex, and perhaps not well understood landscape. So obviously what we have is you have the duplication of data, and where data is duplicated, the chances of it being of a lower quality as time progresses, it massively increases. With the size of the landscape and the amount of complexity that's going on and the amount of aggregation that's going on and mashing and merging of data, it takes quite a long time. I think many organizations will find this. It takes quite a long time to be able to develop a set of figures or a report for which you have very, very high confidence. So it's easy to say at the moment, and it's obvious to say that there is a low confidence in the level of reporting. Quite often when a report is requested, there were reasons will be given why it's going to take a certain amount of time, and when that certain amount of time is done, which might be sort of 3 weeks, or might be 4 weeks, then the next question is, how confident are you this is correct?
Well, the great thing about some of the EUC software that we were discussing is that it can put the control and governance around some of those EUCs, so it can track changes that are being made and can put review workflows around those changes to make sure that it's getting the sign-off and approval at the relevant levels before it kind of goes off into an external reg report.
Yeah, that's true, and I think the tool set that we've been using to build this capability has the ability to literally go down to the cell level. And I think one of the things that we've been finding when we originally do these EUC landscapes is finding, for instance, that some spreadsheets are referring to an out-of-date set of values, perhaps last year's spreadsheet for product codes. It does tend to highlight some things that it would be good to know. And that kind of brings us on to the next bit. The concept of the uncontrolled EUC landscape means that the organisation is running a series, perhaps, of operational risks for which it doesn't know anything about and hasn't got the ability to manage. So from a very basic op risk point of view, there's a distinct amount of value in doing this. The next two really are quite connected, and that's the lack of data ownership and the lack of formal data governance. So when we do, one of the propositions that we've been developing here at Xceed is the ability to be able to do what we would call a pragmatic data governance methodology. And one of the first factors that we try and bring to the surface very early on is who actually owns what pieces of data. I know from previous experience, I think Graham, you yourself, and the experiences you've had in the past, that the concept of data ownership wasn't particularly well understood a few years ago, and it doesn't seem to have advanced particularly well. It's not possible to say that, or it's not right to say that the IT department own the data, because that can't be correct. And you start to look at it. Should it be the chief operating officer? Should it be the chief risk officer? Is it both? So party data, we would say, should be owned by the COO, but there are some elements of party data which are what we call risk data types, for instance. Counterparty risk, which is something that's owned by the chief risk officer. But there's also another thing which we would like to sort of bring to the attention here is that sometimes in talking about data and sometimes in talking about systems, too often there is an emphasis on the structured data world, on IT systems and also on these the EUCs that are there. There is a lot of breadth and depth and richness of information which lives in the unstructured data world, and that is, again, it can either be within your organization in document repositories, in documents on file servers, in operational process documents, for instance, but also unstructured data sitting out in various websites, which could be reference data websites. And again, that's ability to go out and bring in external unstructured data, therefore smart data, to be able to operate more effectively the organization that you have.
Well, a great example of that is some of the work we're doing around client onboarding at the moment. So, to do client onboarding effectively, it involves going to multiple sources of external and internal data in order to get that really good understanding of a client counterparty before you onboard them. And that can be a time-consuming process for any onboarding analyst to undertake. Now, there's certainly an opportunity here, and something that we have within our client onboarding proposition is the use of big data technology to really bring together all of those sources of data into one view or one database that can be searched just once for all of those sources and bring it all together to give a really rich, accurate view of the client itself.
That's true, and of course that means that you're acting in a more smart fashion because you've thought about the data that you can use to help you do that better. And I think also more importantly, just as importantly, is the ability using these tool sets to be able to demonstrate for audit and legal purposes that you have done your onboarding process correctly. But it also covers such things as anti-money laundering, also covers such things as FATCA, KYC, KYB, countering terrorist funding, enhanced due diligence, All of these are elements which have, again, in theory, been forced on asset management organisations by the regulator, but in reality, they are pretty good business sense. You know, if you're going to get into a deal with somebody, you want to make sure that you're doing the right thing, and also you want to try and avoid being in a situation where you could be ultimately fined for allowing unethical business activity. And there are a couple of large banks at the moment who are suffering significant financial fines based on an inability to demonstrate how they could have been doing or should have been doing AML. Okay, so as we come towards the end, we have the last bit here. We've got 3 points. So BCBS 239 and MiFID II, they're not so much guiding principles. They actually demand that you have a full end-to-end view of the data that supports all aspects of the business that you're involved in. And that is what you use internally and also what you use externally. They also demand you have a complete and comprehensive data dictionary or a taxonomy, depends on the definition you'd like to use there. But they're also very, very hot on the idea of having full view of the end-to-end movement of data, the lineage, the dependency, the landscape, and that they want you to be able to demonstrate the fact that you can perform all necessary regulatory calculations in a way that actually fits in with the organisation's risk appetite and the risk tolerance you have. So basically what it is actually that fits your business strategy.
Okay, so I think we've got a few questions coming in here, so I think we'd like to take this opportunity just to answer those. So the first one is really around, is this just a risk thing?
No, it's not. I think one of the things that we're finding, Graham, when we speak to clients is that if you look at BCBS 239, it's called Risk Data Aggregation Principles, but we know from the work that we've done in recent years that risk of all flavours, whether it be credit, market, operational, conduct, compliance, is that risk use pretty much every piece of data in an organisation. So I think it's badly titled that it's just risk. You know? So that's one side. The other side is that the regulator, in a sense, is not telling you to do all this to satisfy what might be some esoteric concerns. What they're asking you to do at the moment is to be able to demonstrate that you're operating prudently, you know, within the laws of the industry that you're in, within the conventions of the industry that you're in. It would be a mistake to assume that this is just a risk thing. You know, strange enough, if we look closely into the BCBS 239 regulations, it does say that firms that follow these guiding principles, will see increased profitability. And it's not often the regulator tells you that.
Okay, great. So there's another question here. Just so, what is our view of how these help with the various regulations coming along?
I think this goes back to my the picture we had at the beginning, which is the Einstein quote. One of the things I'm seeing at the moment is that the regulator themselves are not particularly joined up. You know, so you have a big think about things like AML. You have a think about things called you have a big think about things called KYC. When you look closely, what they're asking, what these regulations are doing, is there's about 90% crossover in what it is that you're trying to do. You know, confirm the identity of a party, ensure you understand the relationship, ensure that you've checked it for AML, or ensure that you've checked it from America. Therefore, you satisfy FATCA. I think what would be very helpful for the industry at the moment would be if the regulator was a little bit more joined up. I think what we're seeing through the work that Graham and I are doing is that we've had quite a close look into the regulations, and we can see how it's possible to do specific pieces of work which have got multiple benefits against some of the regulatory concerns. Okay, so we've got time for one last question here. So how do we coordinate across currently active work change programs? That's a good question. It comes down to, I think, really the bigger element of what we've been discussing here, which is data governance. So with data governance, you would have executive ownership of the data. You would also have the sign-off of any business cases that we're going to release funding for any programs. If you can intercept these business cases at the point where you have a very, very good understanding of what the impact will be on the data and how the data quality issues and data process issues will be managed, you can into that kind of sign-off phase, which means that you have comfort that the data thing has been thought about more early in the life cycle. I think we go back to the point we made earlier on, is that quite often we have projects, we've seen projects and programs just going along doing their own thing, and nobody thinks about the data until they get to that, we need to do a bit of migration. So it's the implementation of the data governance. It's sitting it alongside an enterprise design authority. It's intersecting it before it gets into the IT design authority, because the IT design authority is more about making sure that the solution is correct. When we're doing data governance, we're trying to ensure that the requirements for data are satisfied before we get to the solution bit.
Okay, great, thanks. I've just seen another question come through, and I'll answer that just as we're wrapping up here. So the question is, what capabilities do Xceed have to help in this space? And that's a great question. So what we've been producing over the last few months to address the demand within our clients is a set of smart data propositions. These are focused around such things as client onboarding, counterparty analytics, smart data migration, to landscape simplification, and also EUCs. So we a great team of people with good skills in data governance and data architecture, and we've combined that with partnerships with a number of really good players within this space. It really gives us a proposition to help within some of these challenges that we've been discussing.
And I think what we can do with that, Graham, is with the product cards that we have, we've got the partners are listed, and I'm more than happy to further discussion with who's on the call about what tool sets and what capabilities. The way we like to think of it is what capabilities can be brought to bear to start about the data.
And indeed, we can offer demos, and please do send a request if you'd like for us to demo for you. I'm happy to do that. Okay, so conscious of time here, so I'm just going to bring it to a close, and I'd like to thank you all for joining the session today. I do hope you found it useful, and perhaps look forward to meeting again on a Xceed webinar. In the meantime, if you do have further questions or requests for demo or information, then please do contact myself or Paul. Our contact details are on the screen now. All to say now is very much for and good afternoon.
Yes, good afternoon.